All right, we're going to get started. Hey, everyone. My name is Elise. I'm the lead organizer at Rights and Democracy. We're a bi-state grassroots organization that works with communities in Vermont and New Hampshire to create mass popular change. We're a multi-issue organization that focuses on economic, racial, social, community, and environmental justice. And you are on our weekly Take Action Tuesday call. These calls offer ways for people to take action in Vermont that will build our popular movement and create lasting change. There's a lot of frustration nationally, but we have a lot of work to do here at home in Vermont. And we believe the best defense is a good offense, and that the work really starts locally. And these calls are designed to connect people to the organizations and issues that need your voice and need volunteers in order to succeed. So right now, the conversation nationally since the inauguration has been about immigration. And tonight, our guest is Brendan O'Neill. He's the campaign coordinator with Migrant Justice. They're an organization fighting for the rights of migrant farm workers in the state of Vermont. We'll be discussing their big May Day march that took place yesterday, their Milk with Dignity campaign, and how you can support their work. We are going to be taking audience questions during the call. So if you have a question for Brendan, you can send a message to Shay Totten via the chat form that you can find at the bottom right of your screen. And Shay will be passing questions along to Brendan and myself. So thanks for being here, Brendan.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Great. So to start, can you just give us some background about Migrant Justice, how y'all got started up, and the kind of work that you do in the community?
Sure. Yeah. So Migrant Justice actually got its start back in 2009 when a dairy worker, young dairy worker, 19 years old, from Chiapas, Mexico, was killed in a bad workplace accident up in Franklin County on a dairy farm. And in 2009, the immigrant farm worker community was pretty much under the radar. There wasn't a lot of talk about the fact that our dairy industry is reliant on about 1,500 mostly undocumented workers, mostly young men from Mexico. And this death served as a sort of wake-up call and a catalyst. And a few of us who were connected to the community at the time, including myself, started building basically community forums. We got a lot of folks who were saying, what can we do? We want to support the organization. We put those people to work driving farm workers to meetings, living, as you all know, in a rural state, small workplaces, having basic conversations across workplaces was complicated. Factor in on top of that fears of police, immigration. So we just simply prioritized regional gatherings in the three biggest dairy regions of the state: Franklin County, Addison County, and the Northeast Kingdom. And monthly, just gathered workers together over food and helped facilitate conversations that eventually led to a human rights organization. And workers really defining and understanding their work as human rights work under two main pillars. One is the human right to freedom of discrimination, and the other is the human right to work with dignity. And in the, after a year and a half, maybe 2 years of these community assemblies in those three counties, leaders began to emerge. And they formed what we call the Farm Worker Coordinating Committee, which is the main leadership body to this day of Migrant Justice. And what we sort of built was a basic process and infrastructure where workers could now show up to a meeting, talk about problems, envision collective solutions, and take action, and have a leadership body that could help steer and guide that work. And that led first to a successful campaign in the Vermont State House, where workers fought and won access to driver's licenses, regardless of immigration status. which was much more than just a piece of plastic, as our farm worker members talked about at the time. It was a human rights campaign. It was about breaking chains of dependency on employers in order to just have basic freedom of movement, accessing groceries, getting to health, access healthcare, moving around, or even just voting with your feet if you're stuck in a bad workplace. So fighting for licenses was our big sort of building block campaign. And really we energized the State House for 2 years. For the first time in Vermont history, it was common every day for those sessions to hear Spanish spoken in the cafeteria, built broad support, and actually passed almost universally through the Senate, at least eventually, the driver's license bill. And then the next big thing that we focused on as an organization, so that was 2012 to 2013. In 2013 and 2014, as our members started to get on the roads driving, we sort of came full circle to some of the original, some of the roots of the organization. Folks were encountering discrimination, of course, policing, racial profiling, targeting, police acting as immigration agents, which is absolutely not their job. And we went into the State House in 2014 and passed a bill that made basically that created a firewall between police and immigration enforcement across the whole state. And we've been working to bring police, to this day, we're working to bring police into compliance with state law, and still collaborating with other organizations to tighten up and improve that bill and improve monitoring and enforcement. But it has created certainly a difference. We're seeing a lot less incidents of police turning over immigrants to ICE or Border Patrol. And then sort of the third phase of our work, so we had driver's licenses, policing work, and then through these community assemblies, which is really the heart of all this work, the whole time, is really what sustained it, is the community dialogues and forums defining these strategies and campaigns. We came sort of full circle to the very beginning of the organization. The death of this young worker in 2009 was completely preventable. He was killed in a bad workplace accident in which the equipment didn't have the proper health and safety or safety guards in place. And this death should have never happened. So we started a huge sort of community survey process. That's been a big part of the work that we've done all along. Workers, surveying workers, reaching about 200 different workers, which is almost 10% or more of the population, and basically defining what are the biggest workplace issues. And as we define those, we were then exploring at the same time, how do we change them? And that eventually resulted in these exchanges where Migrant Justice built a relationship that still is a strong relationship to this day with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, which is a Florida-based farm worker organization that has organized tomato workers into these really successful corporate campaigns where they attack the brand at the top of the supply chain where the economic power lies, in order to hold them accountable for human rights abuses, downstream at the very bottom of the supply chain. So that's sort of mapping out of workplace issues, and then eventual search for a strategy that would be effective in Vermont led us to launch the Milk with Dignity campaign, in which we called on Ben & Jerry's first in 2014 to join a program in which they would source their milk in compliance with the human rights of farm workers. And Ben & Jerry's, unfortunately, although they had the opportunity, as we saw it, to get out in front and actually embrace this, they chose not to, and they dragged it out for several months. And eventually on May 1st, 2015, Migrant Justice launched a public campaign and made this a conversation, really made it clear to the nation through the media, through actions across the country at scoop shops, that Ben and Jerry's was not standing up for farm workers' rights in its supply chain. And within 6 weeks of launching that campaign, we landed on an initial agreement with Ben and Jerry's on a broad framework to commit to sourcing its milk through this program, the Milk with Dignity program. And as you may know, just yesterday was the 2-year anniversary of having launched that campaign. We've spent the past 2 years negotiating a supply chain agreement with Ben and Jerry's. And in the past few months, those talks have broken down. Ben and Jerry's has not followed through on its 2015 commitment. And farm workers again decided to take this to the public and to build broad support and invite consumers to stand in solidarity with farm workers and communities to stand in solidarity with farm workers, to call on Ben and Jerry's to do the right thing and to follow through on this commitment. So that's sort of a maybe not so brief history of Migrant Justice, a little bit of how we work, what we've done, and where we are today.
That's great. Thanks for that update, Brendan. So what are some details of the Milk with Dignity program? So I know that there's like the campaign that's corporate accountability focusing on Ben and Jerry's. So what does the program itself look like? Like what is Ben and Jerry's signing on to?
Yeah, good question. And this is actually what, you know, is really exciting about this. And we think Ben and Jerry should be excited about it as well. It's unfortunate that they're not. But this program is a very unique and new approach to securing workers' rights in supply chains. What essentially this creates is Migrant Justice would enter into an agreement with Ben and Jerry's directly, and that legally binding agreement would create a legal framework that would essentially allow us to run this program, a worker organization running a program in Ben and Jerry's supply chain. So it shifts the paradigm, whereas we're all very used to maybe the concept of corporate social responsibility, where corporations are used to defining problems and defining solutions in supply chains and sort of controlling their narrative. This worker-driven social responsibility approach hands that power over to workers, and workers define a code of conduct, which lays out basic human rights in the supply chain. Workers also run a worker-to-worker education program in Ben & Jerry's supply chain, where that would be workers literally going farm to farm, so that workers truly know their rights under this agreement and under the code of conduct. The agreement also establishes the authority of a new third-party organization that sort of acts as the Department of Labor within supply chains, and they both enforce the code of conduct and also resolve complaints. One of the sort of cutting edge pieces of this program is actually, taking employers to court one by one and this sort of thing. A lot of times that sort of litigation approach to rights work drags out for years and years, and actually doesn't even solve the problems. This approach is actually very efficient in that if workers have confrontation, problems, conflicts, abuses, there's a third party that is there for them to ensure that that gets resolved. And it's all backed up by what we call market consequences. So the ultimate cost for an employer who refuses to comply with human rights, and this, at the very most fundamental level, this could be forced labor, systemic child labor, sexual assault. These things happen in agriculture across this country, and Vermont is not immune to it. If those violations are committed on a farm in these supply chains, farms lose their market, right? So it sort of uses some of the mechanisms that corporations use to essentially sort of build their brands and maintain their profits, and hands a lot of those tools over to the workers who sort of use them to achieve rights. And the context that's important here is farm workers in Vermont, farm workers across the country are generally excluded from many labor laws and protections, including the right to collective bargaining. That's in the state of Vermont. So this is an alternative form of worker organizing to really build power and win rights. That's been proven to be very effective in Florida. Farm workers there have 15 different agreements with 15 different corporations and have transformed the lives of tens of thousands of workers. So when we took this to Ben & Jerry's and we laid out this agreement, what we laid out is Ben & Jerry's has the opportunity to get started the first expansion of this model into a new sector. So this could just be the beginning, and we believe it will be, of the expansion of a new model that offers the promise of building a dairy industry in which workers' rights are protected. And actually, in this case, Ben & Jerry's could get behind it and think of it as it adding value to their brand rather than it taking away from the value of their brand. So it's an exciting new model, and Ben & Jerry's has an opportunity to get behind it and help make it happen. And they've chosen not to do that so far, unfortunately.
Yeah. So to the best of your knowledge, I mean, like, what's the holdup for Ben & Jerry's? And is there anything that we can do as Vermonters to push them to commit to this?
Yeah. I mean, I guess, the holdup in general is, I think what I'm laying out here is that this program is a paradigm shift for Ben & Jerry's to actually truly believe in workers, not just speaking rhetorically to workers' rights, but actually to empower workers in their own supply chain to run this program is a paradigm shift for Ben & Jerry's. It's not something that they have any experience with, frankly. And whereas they might feel like they can talk about these issues in generalities, when it comes to actual relationships on the ground in Vermont and you sticking out their neck on behalf of immigrant workers, for one reason or another, they've not been willing to do that so far. And what people can do, Rights and Democracy, 350 Vermont, the Vermont Workers Center, Pride Center, many other organizations actually came out a couple weeks back. We saw you guys on a picket line in front of Ben & Jerry's, where we went in and delivered the each delegation from each organization delivered letters of support. That was impactful. It created some shift and new conversation that hopefully is going to be moving forward at Ben & Jerry's. Yesterday, many of those same organizations endorsed this action. We've been collecting postcards, and you might have seen at the action yesterday or online. We delivered about 1,000 postcards yesterday to Ben & Jerry's, but if there's upcoming events that anyone is going to, or whether it's a festival this summer or a concert or a big political gathering, we would love for folks to help gather postcards. It's something that people can do, and it engages people in the campaign. We're also looking ahead for June 17th is actually the 2-year anniversary of our signed agreement. And that was called an agreement of cooperation, in which Ben & Jerry's committed to the broad framework of the program and committed, actually in written words, right, to implement the Milk with Dignity program in its Northeast dairy supply chain. So it's not just, we have something to hold them to. So around that time, that's a Saturday, we'll be looking at, on June 17th, some sort of big action. We're still needing to define some of the details, but check out our website at migrantjustice.net. We have a take action button. We have a new sort of social media campaign on this called the Chalaco Challenge, which could take off, but the basic premise of it is that shamefully, in the middle of negotiating with farm workers and essentially ignoring farm workers' needs, Ben & Jerry's launched a new product on 4/20 called the chilaco, essentially playing up the sort of taco burrito sort of side of ice cream and some, which is sort of, you know, it was offensive to many of our members to sort of have, on one hand, being ignored, and the other hand, having their own food like tacos, which is sort of a working class food of that people are very familiar with in Mexico, to have that sort of appropriated and injected into a, you know, a whole new ad campaign at the same time has not landed well with the community. So we have a sort of action pack on how you can join the Chilaco Challenge. But yeah, just I think our website is the best place to stay up to date.
Great. And that again is migrantjustice.net. And so we've got a couple more minutes, so I want to transition into, we have some questions from listeners. So the first one is still in regards to Ben and Jerry's. So what say does Unilever have in the decision that they're going to make? And is this like going to be a regional kind of agreement, or does Ben and Jerry's, you know, if they sign on to this is a model for other places as well across the country?
Yeah, good question. First of all, Ben and Jerry's can enter into this agreement with Migrant Justice without Unilever's permission. They have a pretty unique arrangement with Unilever as far as these arrangements go. And that was important to both Ben and Jerry as they negotiated sort of the buyout of Unilever. They set up a social mission board that really controls, has broad authority over entering into these types of social mission programs. So they really don't need to seek permission from Unilever to do this. So it is actually a Ben and Jerry's decision. The second part of the question was about what?
Would Ben and Jerry's, would this be a Vermont or regional thing, or would this spread across the country?
The idea is it has to start, the nature of these agreements is it's a bilateral agreement between Migrant Justice and Ben and Jerry's, and it would start in the Northeast where Ben and Jerry's sources the overwhelming majority of their milk, like 90% or more of their milk globally comes from Vermont and New York farms. So it would start there, and that Ben and Jerry's is essentially, by signing this agreement, they're saying, if you want to be in our supply chain, farm X, you need to abide by these new terms and conditions, which means the Milk with Dignity program and the Code of Conduct. But the model would be where it sort of takes off is that then we essentially have that as a precedent to build upon, where we would be expanding it out to other brands, and that's really the approach. So you can think of many other famous Vermont brands or regional dairy brands. The idea is that those would be the next folks that would be invited to join.
Great. Yeah, I had no idea. 90%. That is obviously a huge number from Vermont, New York. Okay, next question. So I guess, as a preface, like my question would be, have you seen a difference in your work with the new administration? New concerns coming up. And then a question from a caller is, are Kike and Zuli in the clear now that they're out of ICE custody? And what can be done, if anything, to prevent ICE from targeting immigrant activists?
Yeah, no, good questions. It's actually pretty sad to sit here and have to think about that question too much, because the Obama administration really has a terrible history on immigration. Whereas there was some advances, for example, for Dreamers, which is, youth who essentially came here of no choice of their own with their parents. They should be, we should thank politicians when they do the right thing. And that was good for that population. But at the same time that was being implemented, President Obama deported more than any president in history. And though much of that was under the guise of targeting, quote, dangerous criminals, we all know that even that label criminal is very problematic when you think about our criminal justice system from a racial justice perspective that targets, obviously, people of color. So we actually, in the past year, have seen many of our members under the Obama administration and now under the Trump administration targeted by ICE directly. We actually have instances starting last April under the Obama administration in which our members were surveilled, followed. There was intelligence gathering on them, and these are just workers. And we have a lot of questions that we've been raising. We've been raising those with Senator Leahy, with Senator Sanders, with Congressman Welch. We've been raising them with ICE, and we started that well before Trump took over. When Trump did take over, we then had the Kike and the Zuli and the Alex incidents, and these are, of course, of grave concern. And I would say that the thing that has changed certainly is the fear. Trump's, just the hatred, the racism, the overt, just attacks, and the desire to fuel those flames has certainly created fear, and more of our members are living in that fear and are, in some ways, in certain places in Vermont, it's almost as if winning the driver's licenses, winning the, changing policing policies. It's almost like we can see that clock has been rewound like back to the beginning of our organization in terms of workers saying, I don't want to show my face in public in Vermont. I'm afraid to get off my farm. And one of the things that we've been talking about is how these two issues are related, in that leads workers to sort of into bad and exploitative workplace conditions, right? Where workers who are afraid to show their face in public are less likely to organize and defend their own human rights. So we really see the issues as connected: the crackdown on immigrants by the Trump administration, and a dependency on low-wage workers as one feeds the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for making that point too of these issues aren't new by any means. They're just kind of like being fueled right now in the rhetoric, and it's scary, but not new, unfortunately. So our last question for the evening, and this actually, gets into the low wage worker question as well, is like, would Milk with Dignity, would that see Ben & Jerry's paying farmers that they source their milk from, more to help pay their workers more? I mean, Yeah, actually, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I as I was laying out what the agreement would entail in the code of conduct, the worker education, the third party, I actually didn't get to that piece. And yes, absolutely, the idea is farmers would be provided a premium price for their milk to offset costs of compliance with the program requirements. So the vision that workers are bringing to the supply chain is unique, in that workers are actually arguing with Ben & Jerry's that they need to pay farmers better so farmers can support workers, which makes it also very unique in terms of a model of really recognizing that this isn't about the farmer and the worker. This is about the corporation at the top of the supply chain restoring economic justice to the supply chain by sharing and redistributing the enormous amounts of profits that they make off of hardworking farm workers and farmers. Absolutely. Lots of different issues interconnected in this campaign. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Brendan. And thank you everyone who joined us tonight and for your questions. We are going to be posting information about tonight's call, including any information that we've talked about, names, emails, phone numbers of folks who need to hear from you. And remember, migrantjustice.net is where we can find all the information on how to get involved with their organization. And we'll also be posting this information to our website at radvt.org.
Cool. Thanks, y'all.
Great.
And Kike and Suli are out. I didn't answer that. And they still need support, but they have at least a year before they will be going back to court.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all.